Hey everyone, Sumo Spiffy here. With the ascension of Sumo's 74th Yokozuna, this is a good time to talk about what it takes to attain a Yokozuna promotion. In this case, it's not just to go over the mechanics of the process, but also why just about everyone assumed Hoshoryu's chances of earning that sweet white rope in January were gone after his third loss, and how they ended up being wrong. Let's start with the broad picture. The first step in becoming Yokozuna, of course, is rising through the ranks. For 99% of the Banzuke, if you have a winning record, you go up. If you have a losing record, you go down, or occasionally stay in place. But you need to win to go up. If you win a lot more than you lose, you can reach Sekiwake, the third highest rank in the sport. The next rank is Ozeki, which means champion, and winning at just above a 50% clip isn't going to cut it anymore. You need a strong run of 3 straight tournaments to make Ozeki. The only rule is that the last of those tournaments has to be at Sekiwake. Generally speaking though, you're expected to win at least 33 matches over those 3 tournaments, and in the vast majority of cases, guys who make Ozeki were in the Sanyaku at either Komusubi or Sekiwake for all 3 as well. After that, Yokozuna is the only step left to take. Being worthy of the rank can be complex. You can't just be good at winning. You also have to represent the sport well. But on paper, what you need to do in the ring to earn promotion is straightforward. You're expected to have 2 straight tournaments with Yushos or Yusho equivalents. 2 Yushos are essentially a guaranteed promotion. Yusho equivalents may require more discussion depending on circumstances. I've seen translations of what a Yusho equivalent is that differ slightly, but it's enough to think of it as a performance that, under most circumstances, would be enough to win a title. Terunofuji was a perfect example of this. He won in May 2021 and started 13-0 in July. However, Hakuho was also 13-0, and the Yusho was guaranteed to go to one of them. The Sumo Association actually announced at that point that Teru had earned the Yokozuna rank. He hadn't clinched the title, and wound up losing to Hakuho on the last day, but it was clearly a championship-level performance. It just so happened there was another guy flying just as high. And even though we haven't really seen that over the last few years, someone scoring 13 or more wins and not even getting a playoff, it's not uncommon in sumo history. A basho is 15 matches, and you can only beat another guy once outside of a playoff. Sometimes the championship is out of your control. You might reasonably say, well, that's what Hoshoryu had, right? 1 championship and 1 runner-up where he did really well and only lost on the last day. That's true, and it's not like after he lost his 3rd match it was impossible for him to win the tournament. To understand why it was still assumed he would have to wait to reach Yokozuna, even if he did end up taking the title, requires a deeper dive into history. In 1958, sumo started having 6 tournaments per year. This is generally considered the start of the modern era. Since that time, there have been 27 Yokozuna, not including the newest one. Currently, reaching Yokozuna doesn't happen without at least 1 actual championship in the 2 tournaments before promotion, but for the first part of this era, the requirements were more relaxed. 4 of the first 13 Yokozuna of the modern era failed to win either tournament prior to promotion, but all of them had either a pair of very strong performances despite not winning those titles, or a longer-term history of quality sumo to fall back on. Then we get to Futahagaro, number 14 of the era, number 60 overall. I mentioned him in a recent video, but to cover it again briefly. Before promotion, he had a 12-3 June Yusho and a 14-1 playoff loss. As a pair of tournaments, that's pretty good, but at that point he'd also only had 4 tournaments as an Ozeki. Of those 4 previous Yokozuna promoted in similar situations, Wakanohana was at 8 Ozeki tournaments with 7 double-digit win totals. The other 3 all had much longer Ozeki runs than that. Moreover, all of them had won at least 1 top division title, whereas Futahagaro had none. So, Futahagaro didn't have a history to lean on that suggested he'd be a good Yokozuna. He got bumped up in large part because there was only 1 active Yokozuna and a ton of Ozeki, and the association apparently thought that was a bad look. The decision backfired spectacularly. He never won a tournament, was abusive at his stable, and became the first Yokozuna to get thrown out on his ass at the end of 1987. After that, the requirements for Yokozuna promotion were tightened. Between Futahagaro's promotion and getting fired, however, 2 other wrestlers made Yokozuna, Hokutoumi and Onokuni. Hokutoumi had a 12-3 Yusho followed by a 13-2 June Yusho before promotion. Onokuni was also 12-3 and 13-2, finishing second both times, but earned promotion on the strength of his 15-0 championship run immediately before that. However, these two are usually not used as precedent for looking at Yokozuna promotions today because they reached the rank before the requirements were actively made stricter. Still, let's put a pin in them for now. After that, from 63rd Yokozuna Asahi Fuji through 70th Yokozuna Haruma Fuji, all of them were promoted with 2 straight Yushos, and they may not have had a choice. Takanohana, for example, had a 14-1 Yusho and a 13-2 playoff loss back-to-back in mid-1993. We would consider that more than enough now, but he wasn't promoted. In 1994, he won January and May with 14-1 records, and September with a perfect 15-0, but went 11-4 in March and July. He was still put up for promotion by the judges because he was obviously worthy, but got shot down by the Yokozuna Council. It took another 15-0 in November for him to get there. Hakuho dealt with something similar. He had a 14-1 Yusho and a 13-2 runner-up in his first 2 Ozeki tournaments, but wasn't promoted. Both he and Takanohana were young and at the start of their Ozeki careers, which might have played a role. Regardless of the specifics though, they were denied Yokozuna despite back-to-back results that almost always resulted in promotion before Futa Haguro's flameout. Kakuryu's promotion in 2014 was the first since Onokuni to not involve 2 straight Yushos. He had a 14-1 playoff loss to Hakuho, then a 14-1 Yusho. It would have been difficult to argue that a Yusho equivalent counts and not promote him, so he became the 71st Yokozuna. Hisano Sato, number 72, was something of a special case. His 2 tournaments before reaching Yokozuna were a 12-3 Jun Yusho and a 14-1 Yusho. If you just look at those, they're not as good as the tournaments that propelled everyone to Yokozuna from Asahi Fuji onward. However, the full year before promotion included 3 other Jun Yushos. On top of that, he had 12 Jun Yushos in all before winning his first tournament in the age where Hakuho was wrecking everyone in sight. Basically, Kiseno Sato did everything he could as an Ozeki for a long time, and they were just waiting for him to finally win a tournament with good enough back-to-back records to warrant promotion. Then came Teruno Fuji, who we already talked about. And now we have Hoshoryu. How did he earn promotion when the consensus, after his loss to Hirota Umi, was that his run was dead? The main factor working against him was the number of wins he could achieve across November and January. Out of the 11 Yokozuna from Asahi Fuji on, 4 of them, Wakanohana II, Musashi Maru, Kiseno Sato, and Teruno Fuji, had exactly 26 wins in the 2 tournaments before promotion. No one had fewer. Wakanohana and Musashi Maru won both tournaments, so the wins didn't really matter. Kiseno Sato, like I said, was a special case. Teruno Fuji was the only other with 1 Yusho instead of 2, but like with Kakuryu, his runner-up tournament was so good, it was impossible to deny that it was equal to a championship. On the flip side, Takakeisho had 25 wins and a championship in 2 tournaments in 2020. His tournaments before that weren't great, so he couldn't lean on a Kiseno Sato-style longer-term view. He was denied promotion. Hoshoryu was much closer to Takakeisho in this respect than he was to previous Yokozuna. Before his runner-up to Koto Zakura in November 2024, he hadn't won 10 matches in a basho since May and had only ever won 12 once in his career. An Ozeki with those numbers is good. A Yokozuna with those numbers would be a disappointment. So, with all of this in mind, there was no reason to believe Hoshoryu would be promoted with fewer than 26 wins over the 2 tournaments. That meant he needed 13 in January. Once that was no longer possible, the best case scenario looked like a 12-3 Yusho, setting him up for a good chance of promotion in March. However, the Yokozuna standard doesn't talk about total wins, it talks about championships. And since 1958, 3 times as many tournaments have been won with a 13-2 record as with a 12-3. As such, it's much easier to argue that a 13-win Jun Yusho should be considered a Yusho equivalent. If the Sumo Association decided to take that viewpoint, it would make sense for them to deny Takakeisho's 12-3 Jun Yusho and 13-2 Yusho, but potentially approve Hoshoryu with the opposite results. Keisho's 12-3 Jun Yusho wouldn't be good enough to count, but Hoshoryu's 13-2 Jun Yusho would be. Combine that with an actual Yusho, even at 12 wins, and you theoretically have the basis for a Yokozuna promotion. And remember, this is exactly how Hokuto Umi was promoted. Onokuni's promotion path makes sense from this perspective as well. he went 15-0, then 12-3 runner-up, but wasn't promoted because the 12-3 wasn't a Yusho equivalent. His 13-2 runner-up was equivalent though, and the association at the time was willing to view all 3 tournaments as a group. It's not like nobody remembered about this, but again, the stricter requirements after Futa Haguro's retirement made it look like these sort of situations wouldn't be enough. Earlier I mentioned the judges in the Yokozuna Council, but here's a clearer description of how the promotion process works. There's 2 steps. The first is that the judges, part of the JSA, the Japan Sumo Association, have to nominate a candidate for promotion. Then the YDC, the Yokozuna Deliberation Council, has to approve the promotion. These are independent groups, and there have been times where the YDC wanted to vote on someone, but they couldn't because the judges didn't put him forth for a promotion discussion. I bring this up now because Hokuto Umi, the wrestler who made Yokozuna with 2 scores exactly like Hoshoryu's, is now Hakaku, the chairman of the JSA. I've seen a handful of people suggest that Hoshoryu was promoted because otherwise it would look like Hakaku's promotion back in the day was in some way illegitimate. That's not true, and I say that with confidence because, as it turns out, the judges initially didn't plan to nominate him for promotion. This quote, from an article posted the day after the tournament, says the majority of judges were in favor of postponing promotion. This is directly in line with the general assumption that a 12-win Yusho would put Hoshoryu in a good position to claim the rank in March, but not earn it just yet. Takadagawa, the head of the refereeing department, had to specifically request that Hakaku have a judges meeting to consider Hoshoryu for promotion. Now, I'm not saying that the judges fought tooth and nail against it at that meeting. If they had, there would be no promotion. But there wasn't a groundswell of support for Hoshoryu's Yokozuna candidacy either. This one influential guy had to take up for him to get the process started, and he had to do it quickly because the YDC meets the Monday after the Basho ends. The judges needed to vote on it ASAP so the Yokozuna Council could make a final decision. Did the YDC or other outside forces get in Takadagawa's ear and push him to make this happen? Well, this article at least says yes. If I had to guess without this article though, I'd still say there probably was a push. For one, the YDC unanimously approved his promotion. For that to happen after there was dissension among the judges raises the chances of an outside influence making sure the nomination happened. And secondly, it doesn't require a conspiracy theory to believe this, like there's some secret cadre of important people who pushed for an unworthy candidate. There's a pretty obvious logic for why the YDC would want this. Terunofuji didn't make it through the Basho and retired. The sport has historically always wanted a Yokozuna at the top of the rankings. They wouldn't have pushed an unfit candidate, but to say Hoshoryu met the Yusho requirements with 1 Yusho and 1 Yusho equivalent isn't a stretch. Apparently, the desire to make sure they had a Yokozuna to perform the Dohyo Iri when they go to Paris in June and London in October also played a role. But there were still 2 more Bashos before the Paris trip, so I'm inclined to think this was more about wanting to make sure there was a Yokozuna, period. However, and I need to stress this was not a promotion purely on the basis of, we have no Yokozuna, we need a Yokozuna, he'll do. The YDC needs to get this right. If they promote someone prematurely and he flames out, that potentially creates another Futa Haguro situation. And that's really bad in an era of parity where restricting promotions to make sure another mistake doesn't happen could lead to no Yokozuna for years. But some of the comments from the YDC chairman point directly to the factors they saw during the tournament that led the committee to believe Hoshoryu would be a good Yokozuna. The most telling to me is this. He has suffered 3 losses to lower-ranked opponents this tournament, but he fought in a forward-leaning style of sumo and was not defeated by strength. He has a lot of room to grow, so he has the qualities to be a Yokozuna for a long time. This is something we've discussed here, and which has been discussed plenty of other places in recent months. Hoshoryu has really taken to being more forward and aggressive, relying less on his throws, and this comment shows how important that is to the people in charge of these decisions. Even Takadagawa's comment reflects this idea. In the 3rd match, referring to the fight with Hirota Umi, he had a forward-leaning attitude. Even if he lost, he deserves praise. Granted, this is when the guy was pushing the judges to nominate after they initially didn't want to, so it definitely sounds like there's some cope here. But I would go so far as to say that the same results, except with Hoshoryu just throwing dudes around and always trying to get out of their way rather than getting in there and banging, would have left us without a promotion. Another aspect of this is the playoff matches. The question was asked numerous times here and elsewhere whether the playoff wins counted. In response to commenters on this channel, I kept saying no because the context of the question always seemed to be, either implicitly or explicitly, whether they counted because they got him to 26 wins, or rather 27. I said no because it wouldn't make sense for those fights to add to the number. After all, if 26 wins was some kind of magic number, it would require winning 26 times in 30 fights, not 31. As it turns out, another comment from the chairman points to the playoff matches, but in a way that indicates the extra wins by themselves aren't what mattered. Here's the quote, slightly adjusted for clarity. Looking at his record alone, he has 12 wins and 3 losses, but he has fought 17 times including his matches against Oho. He was highly praised for taking on challenges and winning. We would like to evaluate his strength and mental strength in fighting 3 consecutive times including the final bout. Let's break this down. Looking at his record, he has 12 wins and 3 losses, but this seems like a pretty clear indication that the 12 wins on their own didn't cut it. That checks out with the fact the judges initially didn't want to promote him. There was actually an unlikely but possible set of outcomes going into day 14 that would have led Hoshoryu to winning the title at 12-3 without a playoff, and this quote makes me think he wouldn't have been promoted in that case. Moving on. But he has fought 17 times. He was praised for taking on challenges and winning. We would like to evaluate. They already evaluated, the decision was made, so I assume this means they're complimenting him. We would like to compliment his strength and mental strength in fighting 3 consecutive times. Okay, what it sounds like is that the playoff didn't matter in the sense of, hey, he actually won 14 times, so that's enough. But it did matter in that he had to clutch up big time, and that won him some of the necessary favor to be promoted. Now, should that have been enough? To put it another way, is it reasonable for Hoshoryu to have been promoted in part on the strength of an excellent playoff performance if he would not have been promoted without the playoff? What if he'd only had one playoff match? What if the one playoff had been against Kinbozan and he ran the dude over? Or what if it was against Oho and it was a tough fight? I don't know, but that's why a Yokozuna promotion can be so complex. Ozeki promotions are basically locked in if you meet the general requirements and they don't have a reason to turn you down. For Yokozuna, they have to believe you'll fulfill the requirements of the rank sufficiently well, and even though it requires big numbers under any circumstances, it also allows the eye test to play more of a role. A Basha with a single 12-3 winner or a lone playoff match may not have cut it, but that's not what we got. We had a playoff gauntlet, and Hoshoryu used that to help quell doubts that his sumo was of a sufficient quality for the rank. Personally, unexpected though this may have been, I think it was a good choice. His wins all looked good, and his sumo seemed to get better as the tournament went on. The sport is in a place where there's too much parity to expect one guy to consistently put up 13+ wins, and I'm as certain as I can be that the YDC thought about this as well. If they didn't give it to him now and he slipped in March, how long would the sport go without a Yokozuna? Yeah, Hoshoryu kinda backed into a situation where he was able to take the Yusho, but his sumo looked like it's reached a point where he can consistently contend for titles, and that's really the competitive expectation of the rank. Barring injury, of course, I'd be surprised if he now falls apart and goes back to barely winning 10 matches per tournament. So to answer the question at the start of the video, what does it take to make a Yokozuna? Sometimes it's simple. Mix together a couple Emperor's Cups and you're done. But sometimes you need a Yusho, an almost Yusho, a retirement, a broken rival, a substandard backup rival, an upcoming tour, a dose of tradition, a couple unexpected losses falling into the bowl, then stirring so hard you force the mix to come out the way you want. It might have resulted in the most unusual looking Yokozuna promotion in nearly 40 years, but as long as it ends up tasting good, no one's gonna mind. Oh, one last thing. See this kid in the victory car? I'm sure a lot of you know his story already, but if you don't, his name's Tetsuya. Hoshoryu's been working with him and promised to take him on the victory ride if he won. Chris Sumo has more about it in his video about Hoshoryu's journey to the top, so all I'll add is, I've got my favorites, but this has me low-key rooting for nephew too.